So it's 110 years ago. 1 month and 110 years ago, which is incredible. To do it, the Tarra Nova Expedition, which was the expedition where Robert Falcon Scott died on the return journey from the South Pole. Just before he got to the Beardmore Glacier, Scott had obviously relay parties and people with him. Tom Crean, Bill Ashley, and Lieutenant Evans. And these were a support group that got the main group that were going for the South Pole, got them up onto the Beardmore Glacier, which is 10,000 feet. So Crean, Lashley and Evans get Scott up onto the Beardmore Glacier, and Scott continues on to the South Pole. Scott finds a Munson flag at the South Pole. Scott turns back. Scott dies on the return journey. But Evans, Crean and Lashley return from the Beardmore, and they also nearly die. And I think there's this story in here that unless you've read some of the Antarctic stuff, you mightn't grasp what this story is. So they're on their way back. Tom Crean, Bill Lashley and Lieutenant Evans. There was supposed to be 4 of them, but Scott took an extra man with him, and there was supposed to be 4 on this party going back. Anyway, they're towards the end. They're about 90 miles out from the end point, and this is where the story starts. This is from getting back to Hut Point. They're 90 miles out. So Tom Crean and Bill Lashley were continuing their grueling return march from the polar plateau, and were hauling the gravely ill Evans on their sledge. In a desperate attempt to save his life, Evans, who had suffered from snow blindness, having removed his goggles on the descent of the Beardmore Glacier, was by now ravaged by scurvy. Now, Evans was their eyes. He was navigation, which is another part. Previous day, unable to stand, let alone walk, he had ordered Crean and Lashley to leave him behind and save themselves. But they had refused. Instead, they placed their fragile lieutenant onto the sledge and endeavoured to get him back to base. Evans recorded later that, during a long and distinguished naval career, it was the first and last time my orders as a naval officer were disobeyed. On that February 14th, Evans' condition was so grave that when he passed out while being dragged along on the sled, the men thought he had died, and it was obvious to them both that Evans was dying. The odds were still stacked against them, though. Yes, they had passed the last 100 miles point of a 1,500-mile journey, but their physical strength was starting to diminish, and rapidly so. They were extremely cold, on the verge of starvation, and their navigator, Evans, could no longer guide them through the vast Antarctic whiteness that held them captive. 2 days later, however, on the 16th of February, with Evans still managing to cling to life, their spirits were raised when Crean and Lashley spotted the distinctive features of the landscape around Hut Point. On the distant horizon loomed Mount Erebus, only faintly discernible, but at least they now knew they had not strayed off course. They knew where to aim for, but they realized that as close as it appeared, salvation was almost out of reach. Evans was so sick with scurvy that he had been pulled for 100 miles before this point. But Lashley and Crean could not pull anymore, and the decision was made that Lashley would stay in the tent nursing Evans while Crean made a dash for Hut Point. After a march of 18 hours in soft snow, Crean made his way to the hut, arriving completely exhausted. Fortunately, Surgeon Edward L. Atkinson, Royal Navy, was at the hut with 2 dog teams and the dog attendant. His party on February 20th effected the rescue of Lieutenant Evans and Lashley. But for the gallant conduct throughout of his 2 companions, Lieutenant Evans would have undoubtedly lost his life. He is an unsung hero. This solo march, I mean, we just touch on it there for a couple of seconds, but he was jumping over pieces of ice. He did it with hardly any food. He did it after 1,500 miles of travel. And he did it, and he rescued his two companions. He rescued himself and he rescued his two companions. And that's how I got to get into that whole idea. No, Tom Crean never talked about stuff after he came back from the Antarctic. I'm not sure if he was contractually silenced, I think is a better word for it. Maybe he just didn't want to talk. I know his daughter certainly says, he didn't want to talk about it. It was that much hardship. But in a way to honour Tom Crean, that's why I made this film. That's why I did the 56 kilometres. I've been watching a few different channels recently about people wondering what sort of challenge they should do, and I've been thinking about this challenge. It's really, I mean, at the end of it, I felt like this stuff is addictive. It's not so addictive in hindsight, because I look at this same distance some days and I think to myself, how did I do that? How did I do it? But there is a method to it. I think everybody's different, so everybody has to have their own method. Anyway, thanks for watching this film. Thanks for all your support.